Hello, everyone. This is now time period seven's brief review from 1890 until 1945 for the Advanced Placement United States History exam. And there's a lot here. I'll do my very, very best to really keep it brief so the title is accurate. So, what's the big picture for this time period? We'll first start with the theme of imperialism. And I know I'm overlapping, but we have to go back to 1867, 2 years at the end of the Civil War, when we purchased Alaska. Coinciding with the era of imperialism is the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era of 1890 until 1920. And then we will have to talk about World War I from 1914 to 1919. Of course, following World War I, we enter a prosperous time called the Roaring Twenties. That ends sadly with the stock market crash and the Great Depression of the 30s, and then we follow that up with World War II. So let's begin. Imperialism, the desire of the United States to expand its influence, to acquire new territory. What were the reasons for imperialism? The United States was hoping to expand its influence in the world. The United States was looking for raw materials. The United States was looking for new markets. It's great if you can connect that the Gilded Age and the rise of big business had an impact on the U.S. foreign policy of imperialism. And the United States was also trying to help Christianize and bring the American way of life to this new territory. Purchase of Alaska is 1867. That was called Seward's Folly because we mocked the Secretary of State for making the purchase. Turns out it was a great deal since it had oil and gold. 1898, Hawaii was annexed after the people on the island of Hawaii revolted over the Queen Liliuokalani. Then we have our Spanish-American War, which is the turning point of this time period. Prior to the war, the United States was a growing economy. After the war, the United States becomes a world power. Reasons for the Spanish-American War: number one, humanitarianism. We were trying to protect the Cubans from Spain. Number two, economic interests. We had $50 million invested in Cuba. Number three, yellow journalism. Stories were being exaggerated. Number four, the Delaunay letter, which mocked our president, President McKinley. And number five would be the sinking of the Maine, U.S. battleship that was blown up in Havana Harbor. We blamed the Spanish. The slogan became, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." Was it really the Spanish? We found out later in 1971 that it was actually not. The war is called a splendid little war by the Secretary of State, John Hay, and the war ends with the Treaty of Paris. It's a very quick, maybe about a 6-month war, and the results will be that we acquire Guam, and we acquire Puerto Rico, and we acquire the Philippines for $20 million. We also become influential in Cuban politics, becomes a protectorate of ours by us including the Platt Amendment into the Cuban Constitution. Results now, as I said, we become a world power. I just put a few examples. We built the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt's policy was called the Big Stick Policy. We are now becoming the international police. This is an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. Now we can actually enforce it. And open door policy in China, trying to encourage trade for all countries in that area, which led to them revolting against foreigners in the Boxer Rebellion. And then the Great White Fleet is just an example of Teddy Roosevelt showing off our new military might by painting our ships very white and sailing them around the world. All right, so now as imperialism is taking place, on the home front, Teddy Roosevelt is becoming a very influential progressive president. So what does this mean? This is now a time when the United States is going to support more federal government involvement in solving the problems of society. So when people like Upton Sinclair, Jacob Riis, and Ida Tarbell exposed the problems, Teddy Roosevelt called them muckrakers. And I'm not convinced that he said it in a positive way. Raking the muck, exposing the problems. It may have taken a lot longer for us to find out about these problems. So now there's going to be a greater push, a greater call for more involvement in the economy in solving these problems. This is unlike the Gilded Age, where it was a very focused on laissez-faire policies. But remember, I tried to explain to you, I think it's a great thing to understand, more for an essay than it would be for the part one, is there are some people who think that maybe both time periods should be fused together. Maybe we should consider this one era where we were debating the role of government and whether we were debating whether or not we should follow a laissez-faire or a more activist role. Teddy Roosevelt's plan is called the Square Deal. He is a conservationist. He's a consumer advocate. After that book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, he asked Congress to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. There was an anthracite coal miners' strike in which Teddy Roosevelt threatened to take over the mines if they didn't settle the strike. And the reason why is because winter was coming and he was not going to allow his people to go without heat. And then he's a trust buster. I think that's probably his best reputation on the domestic front. Teddy Roosevelt believed that there were good trusts and bad trusts, and he wanted to break up the bad trusts that hurt the people. His successor was William Howard Taft, and ironically, he broke up twice as many trusts in half the time of Roosevelt. There are other issues that led to Taft disappointing Roosevelt, so Roosevelt decided to run again in 1912. He was going to break that two-term tradition of George Washington. However, he did not receive the nomination. So he ran as a bull moose candidate or a progressive candidate. And with Taft and Roosevelt splitting the vote, that led to Woodrow Wilson becoming president. And I would focus on him supporting the creation of the Federal Reserve. But there are also going to be many amendments that are passed at this time. And I really should put them in. So we're going to see if I can do it on the spot. We have the 16th Amendment, which is going to be a direct, I apologize, graduated income tax. Then we have the 17th Amendment, which will be the direct election of senators. Now the people will actually vote directly for the two senators. We have the 18th Amendment, which is going to be prohibition, when we banned alcohol. Sorry about that. Prohibition. All right. Banning of alcohol. That is a end of the temperance movement. Temperance movement was the movement to ban alcohol. And then 19th Amendment, oh, I can't type today, sorry, is women's suffrage. And just remember, it was Charlotte Woodward, who was the only female who lived to see the 19th Amendment ratified, who was alive at the Seneca Falls Convention. All right, I got to move on because I'm running out of time here. So now we get to World War I. And what are the causes of World War I? Well, for the Europeans, the cause is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But we're doing a brief review, so we're not going to go into all that crazy alliance system history. But instead, we're going to say that the U.S. was neutral at the beginning of World War I in 1914. And then, what led to our change in policy? Well, first, we have Germans who are using unrestricted submarine warfare, attacking many ships in the Atlantic Ocean. And one of the most famous ships that they attacked was actually a British cruise ship called the Lusitania. And when they did so, there were 198 Americans on board, and we were very upset with this decision. So, 1916 comes along, and you might think that Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war, but he did not. As a matter of fact, he ran on a platform of, he kept us out of war. And then 1 year later, 1917, after his victory, the Zimmermann telegram appeared. And this was an alleged correspondence between Germany and Mexico, stating that if the Mexicans declare war on the U.S. along with Germany, that Germany will help them to get back the land the Americans took from them. The note was intercepted by the British and shown to the United States. Was it real? If it was, then the British were spying on us, or it may have just been fabricated and made up. Nevertheless, it is time for the U.S. to go to war. Impact on the home front, all production will be used for the war. Anti-German propaganda was all throughout the country, and we bought Liberty bonds, we raised taxes, we planted victory gardens, and we're going to move on from this. Now, and there's going to be another, make sure you know this great migration for African Americans moving north to serve in some of the factory work. We have Schenck versus the United States. This was a Supreme Court case that limited people's freedom of speech. The phrase clear and present danger was used. At the time, it was just that he was handing out anti-war pamphlets. I don't think we would have the same result today. When the war is over, Wilson comes up with his 14 points. This is his plan for world peace. Included in the 14 points was a call for a League of Nations. And the League of Nations would be a world organization committed to promoting world peace. It will be part of the Treaty of Versailles that punishes Germany severely. But all treaties in America must be ratified by the Senate. So even though Wilson was a very big hit in France, they loved him, Article 10 in the League of Nations charter was going to mandate that the United States get involved anytime a member nation was attacked. And the members of the Senate, led by Henry Cabot Lodge, refused to sign the treaty if this was included. Wilson absolutely refused to take it out, campaigned all over the country to get people to support it, but he collapsed from a stroke and was really never the same. And we never signed the treaty, and we never joined the League of Nations. And moving right into our next decade, we have the Roaring Twenties. And at the very, very end of World War I, there will be a Red Scare. And this is because we have an increase in anarchists in the country, and we also have a fear of this brand new system of government, so to speak, of communism, because the Russian government became communist in 1917. So the Red Scare is when we got rid of about 500 foreigners and expelled them during what was called the Palmer Raids. He was our Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer. Our Attorney General today is Jeff Sessions. So I just couldn't help myself on that. I don't know why. So the policy of the time period of the Red Scare is going to lead to a decade of very restrictive immigration laws. So we're going to issue quotas. We're going to limit the number of people who can come to the United States. And when you have a fear of foreigners, that is called nativism. So that's a key component of the 1920s. All right, what else is important for the 1920s? All three presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, are Republicans. They all believed in low taxes. They all believed in less limited government. We are not going to talk about Jerry here, and I wonder if people are watching this who are not in my class. I wonder if their teacher taught them about Jerry. Anyway, the economic situation, the decade was prosperous. It wasn't prosperous for farmers, but it was prosperous for many other people, and one of the components of that was the practice of buying on credit, sometimes called installment buying, where you could put down payments and still receive the goods. We learned last slide, women have the right to vote now with the 19th Amendment. First president they voted for was Warren G. Harding, or election they voted in. I don't know who every woman voted for. Flappers are to your right here, challenging traditional society. The Harlem Renaissance, let's all remember the famous poet Langston Hughes. Many of the themes were about slavery and oppression. Sacco and Vanzetti are just two Italian immigrants who were most likely wrongly accused of murder and sentenced to death. And there's now a holiday in Boston named after them. It's seen as an example of the anti-immigrant sentiment that existed in the United States. The KKK reemerges in the 1920s, and the Scopes monkey trial. I have to be honest, I don't remember if I taught you this. John T. Scopes was a young biology teacher in Tennessee. And in the state in the 20s, the teaching of evolution was not legal. And he did so anyway. So what it shows is that there was a contrast, there was a conflict in the 20s between science and religion. So just a quick reminder if I didn't do that. All right, so the decade ends with the stock market crash of October 29th, 1929. Why did the stock market crash? Well, they were allowing investors to purchase stock on margin. It meant, sorry about that, my computer is updating, and didn't expect that. They were buying stocks on margin, which allowed them to put a down payment, maybe about 10% of the stock price. And when would they pay the rest of it? They would do so when the stocks went up with their dividends. You might say, well, what if they didn't go up? Well, that's exactly what happened. In maybe about September of 1929, stocks started to go down a little bit. And then October, maybe 24th, it was a very bad day on Thursday. The only reason it did not crash then is because Wall Street bankers bought a great deal of stocks on Friday. But when they reopened on Monday, the selling continued and the stock market crashes on the 29th. If you think this is a cause of the Great Depression, your argument is that people no longer could buy the goods that they had done that purchased throughout the 1920s. So now people have to still make the payments from the margin buying of their stocks. So people go to the bank to take money out. When everybody went to the bank to take the money out, the banks failed. And they still have to be able to pay back their investors. So it's a vicious cycle. When people do not buy goods in a capitalist country, that is not good for the economy. These are the other causes that some people think contributed to depression, but we're going to move on because I'm worried about time. Herbert Hoover, self-made millionaire, had the unfortunate situation of being the president at this time. And his general laissez-faire, limited government, conservative, Republican philosophy was rugged individualism. People need to work harder. They need to overcome these obstacles. Maybe they need to be patient. Patience was a key part of his philosophy. If you have money, donate it to charity. But eventually, the economy would fix itself, according to Hoover. This did not happen, so he slightly changed his policy and took two actions that are not particularly conservative. One is the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which lent money to banks, railroads, and insurance companies. And then the other is the highest tariff rate in history, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, with Bueller, that's asking you guys to wake up, which only stifled trade throughout the world and only made the Depression worse. And if that isn't a bad enough circumstance for Hoover, when World War I veterans asked for their payments early, they marched to Washington, D.C. Congress refused to give it to them, and this led to a conflict with our military today. Hoover called in our military, led by Douglas MacArthur, and they used tear gas on our own soldiers. A disaster for Hoover. People started to blame him, called Hoovervilles, Hoover blankets, Hoover flags, and the new president will be FDR, a major shift in philosophy. FDR is extremely liberal in his policies. He won the election fairly comfortably in the inauguration. He said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Remember, he has fireside chats where he encourages people to have confidence in him. His plan will be called the New Deal, and that every agency is just part of this one New Deal domestic agenda. But the first action is we must go after the banks. So he closes every bank down for a bank holiday. He will only reopen them when we know that they are safe and secure, give people confidence that they could put their money there. Glass-Steagall Act, which you know I feel very strongly about, is an act that basically regulated the banks. If a bank wants to be an investment firm, that is okay. If a bank wants to be a place where people can deposit money, that is okay. But to use the two together is too dangerous and too risky, and that's what the Glass-Steagall Act did. Bill Clinton is the president who repealed that in 1999. All of these acts are called the alphabet agencies. The AAA paid farmers to not grow crops. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, built a dam, hydropower dam, to provide people with cheap electricity. Critics called that socialism. The CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, young men went out to the Midwest to work in the environment, got paid $30 a day. I'm sorry, $30 a month. The PWA, Public Works Administration, you get the point. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And don't forget Social Security. That's kind of an important one. Creation of Social Security is something that is still around today. Critics of the New Deal, the one that I taught you is Huey Long. He actually believed that the New Deal was not liberal enough, and he was the kingfish, wanted to give everybody a house, a car, and pay for it with a 100% tax on everything over $1 million. He was assassinated, and business people didn't like it because it was destroying the laissez-faire philosophy. Supreme Court also ruled that some of these acts were unconstitutional, and he tried to pack the Supreme Court, but that did not pass Congress. And then World War II. World War II begins when Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. Our policy was neutrality. That evolved into cash and carry. We allowed people to receive goods from us if they paid for it in cash and carried it on their own ships. That evolved into Lend-Lease when we do start to get involved in lending supplies for the Allies. We don't get involved until after we're attacked at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Home front, you all know Rosie the Riveter and women are getting involved in the factories. African Americans are fighting in this war, and they called for a double V campaign, victory in Europe, but also victory at home in the civil rights movement. Again, all business activity was geared toward the economy. It's good to know that the economy improved. Some people say that World War II got us out of the Great Depression. Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. This was an executive order by FDR. One man challenged it, Fred Korematsu, but he lost his Supreme Court case. And 40 something years later, under Reagan, we agreed to give payments, reparations to Japanese Americans. And our Manhattan Project is the plan to build the atomic bomb. If you'd like more info on World War II, remember I did do a lengthier video just on that war, which should be on my channel as well. That's the best I can do. I stumbled a little bit. I'm doing this in school and I got distracted a few times, but you guys are doing really well, and I will see you for time period 8 coming up. I have a tough time ending these all. I always feel like I want to keep going. All right, have a great day.